This is the Bible Ranger here. We're going to be talking about pre-trib, post-trib, questions about pre-tribulation, part 3, episode 49. Now, I want to start off by saying that I missed last week. I've been on schedule once a week since I started, almost a whole year, but I had some software issues, so sorry about that. So let's continue. All right, questions that need to be asked, right? How many resurrections are there? In the post-trib, basically is 2 resurrections. In the pre-trib, they kind of break the first one in 2 parts, and they would say something like, he comes in the clouds, then we go out for a while, and then he comes back for the left behind Christians. So that would be another resurrection, another rapture. Another question is, how many last trumpets are there? And how many comings or gatherings of God's people? It's kind of, they're all related. And does one of the comings come in the clouds and the other one, he steps on the ground? Are those just separate events? And what about the imminency of Christ? He can come any minute. Is that supported scripturally? And what about the deliverance, being delivered from the raft, like Noah with the ark or Lot with Sodom and Gomorrah? So let's answer from the scriptures to try to avoid statements like, would God drag his bride through the mud, thus being the tribulation, before he marries her? And those are statements that I've heard, in church. All right, so how many resurrections are there? In Revelation chapter 20, this is very close to the end of the whole Bible. Verse 4. So if you see a verse like this, I'm just specifying the verse, and this is condensed. All right, here goes. The believers are present with the believers who are present with the Antichrist are now dead. Okay, they have not received the mark, and they will reign with Christ for 1,000 years. That's what the verse says. Verse 5. The rest of the dead, the non-believers, will not resurrect until 1,000 years after the reign of Christ. So basically, everybody, believers and non-believers, will be resurrected at one point or another. But there are 2 resurrections. So this one, it ends by saying, and this is the first resurrection. And this is an example here, this verse 5, how Revelation does this. It kind of takes you to the end, and then it comes back and it fills in spots that it needed to fill in from before. It wasn't very detailed. So this is an example of the verse. Even though it's talking about the second resurrection, it states here that this is the first resurrection, and you'll see that by the next verse it'll clear it out. And it'll say, verse 6, blessed are the ones in the first resurrection. Okay, in other words, the people from verse 4. They shall be God's priests and reign with him for 1,000 years. And this is called the millennium. More examples are in John chapter 6, verse 40. Jesus is out there doing a sermon, and he says in a sermon that those who believe in him, he will raise them up in the last day. Last day, right there. All right, so that's another example. But that goes together with this one. Now we have Martha. And Martha, brother Lazarus, died. And she's upset. Everybody's upset, obviously, because they know that if Jesus was there, he would have healed him. And Jesus says, your brother will live again. And she goes, yeah, I know, in the last day. So she knows there's a resurrection coming, and they call it the last day, just like the verse above it. And Jesus says, no, yeah, that's basically true. But I'm going to, basically, you're going to see something incredible happen right now. And that's a great story. You should read it. So in 1 Corinthians 15:52, you have the change, not the actual rapture. It doesn't happen, everybody's gone and everything's instant. Read it carefully. Read verse 51 and verse 52. And it's talking about the change of being human to being immortal, living forever. The change happens in a twinkle of an eye. Not disappearing, the change. We'll have a body like Christ. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 and 17, said the dead in Christ will rise first, and then us who are alive will live with him forever. All right, let's go to the next one. How many trumpets are there? In Revelation 11, verses 15 through 19, let's start verse 15 first. They talk about the 7th trumpet, because there are 7 trumpets, and they are 7 seals first, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls or veils, depending what translation you're reading. On the 7th trumpet, it says there was great voices. It says in heaven, for the moment that Jesus rules for 1,000 years basically has come. So everybody's exciting. It's a big roar, and it's an incredible excitement. Verse 16 and 17, basically it says that heaven worships God. I just condensed it. And verse 18 says that the nations, these are the people that are alive on the earth, they now see Jesus and they're upset, they're angry. And somewhere else it says that they're scared because his wrath is come. This is the wrath of God. But at this time, we are picked up, by the way. So we don't get the wrath of God. The tribulation is not the wrath of God. So when we get picked up, the righteous are rewarded, the people who are with the Lord. The first resurrection, which is everybody who died, who's already dead, and everybody who's alive at that time. If you have, it's not going to be many people left, but most of us will probably die. And then there's going to be judgment for the people that are going to be damned, people that are going to hell. Now in 1 Corinthians 15:51, we kind of read the verse after that in the last previous slide. It talks about the twinkle, the change that happens in the twinkle of an eye. The twinkle is the last trumpet. And you will hear people say, because Paul wrote Corinthians, you will hear people say, well, that's not the same trumpet as Revelation. What do you mean it's not the last? I understand that Paul didn't know how many trumpets there were going to be, but he knows it was the last trumpet. These are the same trumpets, by the way. There's nothing to disprove that other than a bias about pre-trib and post-trib. So the last trumpet and the 7th trumpet, they are the same. So in Matthew 24, which is a great chapter, we have to talk about that chapter all by itself. It clearly says that after the tribulation, Jesus comes. And this is when he brings his wrath, which is here, but we are with him. So the wrath of God is not for us. And the coming of Christ is very visible. There is no invisible coming of Christ. No, like, what happened to the Christians? There's millions of Christians gone. No, that's something that we kind of made up. Okay, and I preached that myself. I spoke about that myself many times to other people between the ages of 15 and 30. So it's very visible. So verse 31, it says that the trumpet sounds, which is the last trumpet, which is the 7th trumpet. This is Matthew 24:31. It says it sounds, and the rapture happens, or the first resurrection, and we meet in the clouds. The reason I say that specifically is because there seems to be a separation in the pre-tribulation camp, that there's a coming that Christ comes in the clouds and we go with him. He goes out there, we have a wedding, then he comes back and we're gathered with him, and then he comes back down. I will try to show you later that is all one event, but there is a little gap there, okay? And I'll explain that later. And like I said, it's going to be there for a little while, but we do come down. All right, how many gatherings of the people of God? There's no verses of 2 raptures. There's no verses, okay? Everything that you'll see, it'll be, if you put a bias or a spin on it, or a hyper definition, or an allegory, or a type in shadows, you can come up with anything, okay? But there is no specific, you can't say this is this one and that's, the Bible does say the first resurrection and the second, and that's clear. So I'm going by that. So, please show me a verse if you disagree. Be polite. We are Christians here. However, I'll explain later that the rapture happens first, and then we'll meet the Lord in the clouds. A time probably happens weeks, and I'll give you a quick preview. And the reason there's that, because in Armageddon, there's going to be a gathering of military there that knows something's going on, and they're going to try to fight God. Isn't that crazy? And if you know anything about the military, it takes time to move men, equipment, and supplies. Okay, you just can't do it overnight. Okay, it just takes time to do movement, unless they were there already, which I don't see that in the scripture. And then the second coming comes, and then we will come down with him. All right, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. And basically it says that about the second coming. If you read it, it says about the second coming and the gathering. So it's putting it together. The second coming and the gathering. Then verse 2 says, don't worry, Christ has not come yet. The Thessalonians, for some reason, they thought that Christ had already came. Somebody out there was putting out false letters, false epistles, false preachings, that you basically missed the coming of Christ, and they were concerned. And Paul's like, nope, don't worry about it. And then he gave them two precursors of them that had to happen first. And one of them was there has to be a falling away first, a coldness of the people, okay, a falling away. And like I said last time, where I think in the United States alone, we're losing like 1,000 churches a year, I believe. And then the Antichrist has to appear. So we have to see the Antichrist before the coming of the Lord. All right. There's a statement there, like which I spoke earlier, that pre-trib people say, well, one coming, he comes in the clouds, and the other one, he steps on the earth. Let's talk about that slightly. All right. So there are many verses about the coming of Christ in the clouds. Many verses. Okay. All the verses about Christ coming is a visible appearing. There's nothing about something about Christ coming invisible. Nobody noticed. Planes are falling out of the sky. Cars are crashing. It makes a nice picture and it makes a nice movie. But now, mind you, if you're a driving Christian and Christ comes while you're driving, that will happen. But the way it seems that most of us are going to be persecuted. So unless, there is another alternative. And we'll talk about that shortly, soon to come, that the other alternative is that the Bible is Israel-centered Bible. So most of this stuff could be happening in the Middle East with the Muslims and the Israelis. And we're not going to get as affected as they are over there. That is a possibility. I like to try to cover all the possibilities. That way nobody's surprised. All right, Titus 2:13. It says, his glorious appearing. He comes. You can see him. Hebrews 9:28. He shall appear the second time. And there's tons of verses. I only put a couple here. Acts 1, verses 9 and 11. Jesus is taken up in the clouds. This is his last moments on earth. He gives them a little, speech there, and he's coming again, and then he slowly goes up. And they see him going into the clouds, and he disappears into the clouds. And the angels that are there, two angels appear as men, and they say, what are you looking at, basically? The same way he's disappearing now, or going up now, he's going to come and appear in his second coming. In Revelation chapter 1, verse 7, it's really clear. And it says, Jesus, it says, he comes in the clouds. So this thing about the clouds and then he disappears and he comes back, second coming. No, it's the clouds. He comes in the clouds. If you read other verses of the tribulation, it's a gloomy day. It's a day that you don't know if it's day or if it's night. Something's going on with the earth it's not very clear. Okay, so yes, he's going to come in the clouds. Okay, comes in the clouds, and every eye shall see him. And the people that are not believers, they're going to wail. They're going to be afraid, and they're going to be angry. And in another place, Christ is that the people that are not believers are saying they're hiding in mountains. And, we have those mountain hiding places throughout the United States and other places where they see Christ and they says, please let the mountains fall on us. They don't want to deal with the wrath of the Lord. All right. Imminence of Christ is supported in the Bible. It surely says that he comes as a thief in the night and no one knows the day or the hour. Absolutely. Those are definite verses in several places. Now, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 10, we're going to read that later in a few slides away from here. And it says he does come as a thief in the night. In Matthew 24:36, it says that the day and the hour only the Father knows. And we'll talk about that too. But I must say that is a strange verse. The verse about Matthew 24:36, it says that only the Father knows. And I'm thinking, this is me speaking, that Jesus must be talking as the human Jesus, because we all believe that he knows everything. How can you know everything except that? So I'm thinking he knows now when he's coming. This is me speaking. It's just a strange verse having a all-knowing God not knowing that. All right, so let's go on. Now we know that there's a midpoint of the tribulation. There's no question about that. That's in the book of Daniel and other places, which we will be speaking about. And that Christ comes about 42 months after that. We know approximately, but we don't know exactly the day or the hour. And it's like the Feast of Trumpets, which I spoke about, I think, last video, which we know the season, and we know that if you're not familiar with the Feast of Trumpets, it's a holiday in which the Jews celebrate, but they have to wait for the crescent of the moon to appear here. And they know that it's coming either tomorrow or today or the next day, but they don't know exactly. So they have a watcher. And the watcher tells the priest tells the high priest, and then the beginning of the Feast of Trumpets start. So it's similar like this, where we know that Christ is coming really, really soon, but we don't know exactly when he's coming. And in Mark 13:29, it says that when these things happen, he's right at the door. So we're going to know that he's coming. The people that believe in him know. The people that are not believers, they will not know anything. They will be surprised like a thief in the night, and it's going to be horrible on them. All right, so the imminence of Christ is supported, meaning that he's going to come at any time. Anytime. So Christ's imminency, I'm saying it is not possible. And I'll explain why. I'm saying it is definitely not possible because in John 21:18 through 19, Jesus himself predicted the death of Peter. And Peter died as an older man. Now, we don't know exactly how old he was, but he died as an older man. And so Christ had to wait for the death of Peter, even to be imminent, right? And it's something else that was predicted. Predicted the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And I believe, I read somewhere that Peter died just before that, like in 69 AD. But don't quote me on that. So listen to this, for example. If the imminency is true, it's kind of like Jesus saying this. I will come unexpectedly at any time, but it only counts after Peter's death, and it only counts after the destruction of the temple. It doesn't make sense. Okay, you can't have that imminency, and you need the Antichrist to come. You need the falling away. That's a lot of stuff. So you can't have this imminency. It's not for us. We're going to know when he's going to come. Not exactly, but we're going to know. But the people who don't believe, it's going to be a super surprise for them. All right, the wrath of God is not for us. We all agree on that. For some reason, they don't think we agree on that because the tribulation, the great tribulation, is not the wrath of God. Okay, and as we go through more videos, I'm gonna, we'll make that more clear. So the short answer is heaven no, is not for us, the wrath of God. Now we're gonna read in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verses 1 through 10. And okay, I'll just do the condensing so it won't take so long. But basically in verses 1 and verses 2, it basically says that that the coming of the Lord comes as a thief in the night. And that's pretty clear. It says it right there. Verse 3 says, when they say peace and safety, suddenly it comes upon them. It comes upon them, and they shall not escape. So who are the them and who are the they? Now this is verse 4. This is Paul speaking to the believers. He said that you're not in darkness, that you're going to be overtaken as a thief. Look at that verse. That's incredible. It says that you're not in darkness, that you're going to be overtaken as a thief. So this thief in the night is not for us. We're not the ones in darkness. And then he clarifies it a little bit more, and he goes that we are the children of the light, and that we are awake and we are sober, versus being drunk and being sleepy and being in darkness. Read it. It's there, verse 5 through 8. And verse 9 says that God has not appointed us to wrath, absolutely true, but to salvation. But the wrath of God is not the tribulation. In Matthew 24:31 or 29 to 31, it says that he comes after the tribulation. It's pretty clear. So when the pre-trib people use Noah, Noah was taken up like a rapture out of the flood, which is the tribulation of the earth. No, that's not the wrath. It was a wrath for sure, but you can't put that together. You're doing this. You're doing hyper meanings, and you're putting shadows and types and things that are not clear. You're putting into verses that are clear. And the part that Sodom and Gomorrah, that Lot was taken away with his family from there. Yes, that's true. There was no wrath to them, and there won't be any wrath to us. So that doesn't really apply to us, because the wrath of God is not for us. All right. So there are different views of the rapture, but we all believe that Jesus is the one way to salvation. We all believe that. And that's clearly in John chapter 14, verses 6. Jesus is the only way. So one day he's going to come for you. If you're dead or alive, it doesn't matter. He is going to come. Everybody believes that. So repent and become a follower of Christ. And if you found this video to be helpful, I'm kind of stuck on 66 subscribers. So I encourage you to please subscribe and tell somebody else to pass the message along. So thank you very much, and give me a thumbs up on the way out. This is the Bible Ranger, keeping the Bible simple yet rich in content. Thank you very much.